Good day traders, this is Stefanos on behalf of Tixee, and in today's video we'll be giving a look back of the market for the week of the 22nd until the 26th of August. Looking at the highlights for this past week, as we mentioned in last week's outlook, on the stocks front we had a number of stocks reporting their earnings, some of the biggest ones being Nvidia and Salesforce over the course of this past week. On the Forex front we had GDP data from the US on Wednesday. But first, the disclaimer, as always, please note that all of the ideas discussed in the webinar are my own opinions and do not make up for any form of investment, trading advice, neither any recommendations to buy or sell. You should always do your own research and due diligence before buying or selling any securities, financial products or instruments, and whether you use any kind of trading strategies. Any information that relates to past performance is not indicative of future results. So, kicking things off, first things first, you may have seen there's been a slight revamp of the website and some of the icons, the coloring on Tixee's website, which is a very nice, refreshing kind of change to see. You'll see some of the tabs may have changed slightly at the top here, but of course, if you were already using Tixee prior to this change, nothing, they haven't really removed any of the tabs. You will find any of the options you would have found previously as well. But it just may be a little bit different as to where it's located now. But nevertheless, it's a very nice, refreshing change to see. It obviously makes the whole page look a lot clearer as well. And obviously some other added features like Tixee Live that you can also see on the website's homepage now as well. But aside from that, as we said, we're going to be talking about stocks first. As we said, we had both Nvidia and Salesforce who had their earnings announcements over the course of the past week. Now, both of them, they reported their figures on the same day, which was the 25th, and they both also released them after the market close. It was the 24th after the market close. So what that meant is that we saw the impact on the 25th. So you can see this was the day that they released the figures. So this is Nvidia, and if I switch on to Salesforce, again, it's going to be the same day, so which was like the one before the one we're looking at right now. In terms of the actual results, both of them also on this occasion, they had quite similar results in the sense that they both beat the revenue and earning per share estimates. However, the way that this played through with the stock price was a little bit different. Now, if we look at Nvidia first, we can see we closed here on the day prior, on the day of the actual release of the announcement. And then with the open on the very next day, what happened is that we actually gapped down and we closed the previous day around 172.80, and we opened on the very next day all the way down to 169.9. But nevertheless, you can see that it was a pretty positive day overall for Nvidia, as it closed the day up being 4%, which is quite strong for a size that's priced like Nvidia is. So yeah, at the end we can see that with the results of the earnings report, it played through as one would have normally expected, which is for the stock price to essentially rise. Now, if we switch over to Salesforce though, it's going to be a slightly different story. You can see, don't be fooled by the fact that it's a green candlestick here, because even though it is overall on the day, look, comparing it to the previous one, it's still going to be down, because on the day of the release of the announcement, the stock price was all the way up to 180, and then with the open on the very next day, and again reiterating, they had a pretty strong earnings announcement as well, in the sense that they beat both estimates. But with the very next day, it opened all the way down to 166. So it was more or less like a $15 gap from one day to the other. Of course, it did manage to recoup, I'd say, half of the losses, because it opened being down around about 6.5%. And towards the end of the day, it ended up being down 3.5%. So again, comparing it to the previous day, because we have to take into account the gap down as well. Overall, it's down, but obviously it did recoup half of what it had lost from the previous day. So yeah, obviously, if we compare the two, Nvidia was the slightly more straightforward one, in the sense that, yeah, it did gap down lower as well, but towards the end of the day, it was net positive after the report. Whereas, as we can see from Salesforce, even with this huge move upwards, it's still net negative from the day prior. So yeah, it can pretty much show you that the earnings reports, usually they can be straightforward, but there's also the times that even if we get a pretty positive one in the sense that both estimates are beaten, we can still see the stock being down, because it also depends what the narrative is going to be during the press release, what the company's executives are going to mention with regards to the future of the underlying stock, which can obviously heavily impact that. It can also depend how priced in a positive outcome or a negative outcome is. So on this occasion for Salesforce, a positive outcome could have already been well priced in, and once we actually got that, we actually saw prices gapping down lower. So there is a variety of factors. Again, this is not always the case, but it just goes to show that it can happen even with a strong positive earnings report, even or on the contrary, if it's a strong negative one as well. So yeah, this is with regards to stocks. Now moving on to Forex, it was a rather choppy week, I'd say, across the board. Let me just switch on to TradingView and we'll put the dollar index in front of us. And I'll switch this on the weekly. So you can see we did try to test the highs up here, which we actually did test. And as soon as we did, we pretty much fell off of the highs quite sharply from that point, which meant that this translated onto the major currency pairs. So you'll see, like, overall on the week, the weekly candlestick itself is more or less like a doji, or some other people would say it's like a shooting star, whatever you may want to call it. The point is that it's not a strong positive or a strong negative candle on this occasion, but rather price is quite neutral. Although this candlestick pattern in itself can be quite bearish, in the sense that if buyers try to push through this level but they didn't manage to do so, and sellers were strong enough to bring the actual closing price all the way down here and below the half point mark of the whole length of the candlestick, it could indicate that selling pressure is becoming stronger and stronger. But yeah, if we look, for example, at the euro dollar, we'll see again the candlestick itself is a pretty narrow doji one compared to the previous week's candle. If I look at the pound dollar, pretty similar case here as well. Let's look at another one, the Swiss franc, more or less the same case. And let's look at the last one, the Japanese yen. And yeah, pretty much an even narrower one here. So yeah, overall on the week, it was pretty choppy, because obviously we're still waiting for any further clues or updates with regards to what route the Fed is going to take with regards to further rate hikes, with the next monetary policy meeting being in September. So as we await for any further updates with regards to that, we can expect prices to be slightly more choppy. And also, let's not forget that next week we're going to have the NFP report, as usually the case is with it being released on the first Friday of each month. So since next week's already going to be September, it's going to be the first Friday of September, we're going to have the NFP report. So when there's like a highly volatile event that's going to be taking place, building up to that, we can expect some more choppy prices, as we can see institutions trying to position themselves ahead of the release of the important announcement, whatever that announcement may be. But in our case, it's like we said, the NFP report. So overall, it was a quite choppy week, but there was one considerable mover over the course of the week, and that one was the Australian dollar and the US dollar. And as we can see, it's one of the candlesticks that over the course of the week, it's pretty much a confident bullish one, if you want to put it that way. As you can see, after reaching the highs, and we're still trading up towards the highs, we haven't retraced much off of them. Now, one potential reason to that is the fact that there was a press release that mentioned that China was pretty much going to be introducing a stimulus package in order to control its flailing property market. So obviously, because China is also one of the, if not the largest trade partner of Australia, any positive news that may come out of China can obviously influence the Australian dollar itself. And as we can see with the US dollar, where over the course of the week that was slightly weaker, then the Australian dollar took advantage of that. And as we can see, it's up by 1.5%. You can see at the top right here. So it's up by 1.52%. or just slightly over 100 pips over the course of this past week. So yeah, this is with regards to Forex. And lastly, we're going to look at the commodities such as oil and gold. Let's switch back to tixee's web trader, and we can put crude oil. I'll switch this one also onto the weekly. Now overall then week, you can see it did gain some ground, oil itself. With regards to percentages, it was up by more than 3.2% or $3. We did have a quite positive oil inventory report that took place on Wednesday, because the actual report showed a much larger deficit in supplies than one was expected. And if that wasn't enough, we had Saudi Arabia's oil minister mentioning that during the past week, OPEC may consider cutting production even further because the futures market is not reflecting a tight physical market. So as you can see from the supplies from the weekly report, they were already quite tight, and with the oil minister mentioning that they could tighten them even further, then that's why we're seeing a pretty positive movement with regards to oil prices over the course of this past week. So yeah, like we said, overall up 3.2%. And then looking at gold, it was rather choppy as well, seeing as how we didn't have any large movements or significant movements with regards to the dollar index. So it's slightly up over the course of the week. It's a measly 0.4% or $10. Obviously, one of the events that's impacting gold is still the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. Of course, we're not getting as much of an intense coverage, I would say, with regards to news articles over what's happening. We're still getting updates, but I wouldn't say it's anything compared to what we're getting towards the beginning, and hence why we may not be seeing as strong of movements with regards to gold. But yeah, there you have it. This is as far as the look back and review for this week. Again, let's not forget we have the NFP report next week, which we're going to be covering in the upcoming outlook. So definitely make sure you stay tuned for that one as well. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and you found it useful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, trade safe.